What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. It is Friday, November 21st, 2025, and I have some breaking news to share with you guys. Right now, it is 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time here in the United States, and we have some major breaking news coming in from Venezuela and also from Ukraine. So I want to start with Venezuela. Yesterday, we had several U.S. B-52 strategic bombers fly down to Venezuela and Guyana, and then they flew back up to North Dakota Minot Air Force Base, which is their home base. And here you can see the flight path of these B-52s. We know that there were two of them, and they took off from Minot, which is their home base, and then they went all the way down to Guyana, and they were up in the air for a long time, probably about 18 hours, and they turned their trackers off when they were over the Caribbean, okay? And then here you can see a close-up shot where there was one ping on the flight tracker. One of these B-52s turned its tracker on momentarily near Guyana. So we know they went all the way down to Guyana, but we don't know exactly where they were flying off the coast of Venezuela. Also, we had at least one F-18 flying just several miles off the coast of Venezuela near Aruba. And then there was a U.S. recon plane flying off the coast of Guyana looking towards Venezuela. Okay, so things are really heating up over here. It looks like we could be just days away, hours away from a massive attack on Venezuela. And Maduro yesterday held a meeting with his generals, and he was showing a map of Venezuela, and he said that Venezuela is prepared for any prolonged war, and he announced that heavy weapons and missiles have been deployed to the Caracas-La Guaira corridor. So very, very serious. Maduro is preparing to dig in. Maduro said that Venezuela has activated a full defensive posture over the Caracas-La Guaira axis in response to the massive U.S. military buildup. Speaking on state TV, Maduro held up a coastal defense map and said a militia weapons park is already installed and operational. The entire network of rifles, heavy weapons, and missile systems is now deployed to defend the capital and its coastal approaches. The plan was designed not just by military planners, but by organized communities along the corridor. Wow. Okay, so Maduro announcing that heavy weapons and missiles have been deployed around the capital of Caracas, capital of Venezuela, which is Caracas, okay? And one of the major challenges for U.S. forces, if they were to try to go to Caracas, is that there's really only one easy way in and out of Caracas. There's a massive mountain ridge that separates Caracas from the coast, and this mountain ridge goes up to almost 9,000 feet, and it spans basically the entire coast of Venezuela, and even a majority of the coast of Venezuela is very steep and rocky, and there's not a lot of good spots for beach landings except closer to Caracas where the international airport is. Now, the U.S. could seize the international airport just to the north of Caracas, the Simón Bolívar International Airport, which is just literally a quarter of a mile from the coast. And in that area, the coastline has a very flat topography, which is perfect for making beach landings with that Marine Corps amphibious assault group, okay? But the main challenge is being able to cross that mountain ridge to get to Caracas, and there's only one way to do that, and that's through this highway that goes from the Simón Bolívar Airport all the way to Caracas through that ridge, and there's a tunnel about a mile long that goes through this ridge, and all Venezuela has to do, all Maduro has to do is just blow that tunnel, and then U.S. forces would either have to climb over 9,000 feet to get to Caracas, which is not going to happen, or they're going to have to go all the way around the ridge, maybe 70 miles to the east or like 50 miles to the west, okay? So there is a serious natural barrier between Caracas and the coastline. And satellite imagery captured by European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 satellite has revealed the current position of U.S. Navy warships conducting joint operations with Trinidad and Tobago's military forces in the southern Caribbean. The images dated November 18 confirm the presence of the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group in waters north of Venezuela as part of the bilateral training exercise underway from November 16 to November 21, which is today. According to the coordinates reviewed, the amphibious assault ship, the USS Iwo Jima, was located approximately 69 kilometers north of Venezuela's Paria Peninsula. The vessel is operating near 11.356 degrees north and 61.691 degrees west, just off the northern coast of Trinidad and Tobago. Additionally, the USS Fort Lauderdale and a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke destroyer were observed approximately 21 kilometers from Venezuela's Isla del Patos, situated at roughly 10.455 degrees north and 61.792 degrees west. These vessels are part of the same amphibious force operating in support of regional exercises. Okay, so we have a Marine Corps ship just to the north of Trinidad doing exercises all week with Trinidad. Then we have a guided missile destroyer. Okay, now I counted that we have over 1,100 missiles pointed at Venezuela right now, because we have about a dozen destroyers and submarines, and each one of those destroyers carries about 96 missile cells, okay? So in one round, they can launch over 1,000 missiles at Venezuela if needed. All right, that is some serious firepower, and we have the largest aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy right off the coast of Venezuela. So it's going to go down, guys. And when it does, I will cover the situation live 24/7, as I always do when these big events go down. And here we have the flight path of a U.S. aerial refueler that was operating in the southern Caribbean. This is where the Gerald Ford is located right now. All those guided missile warships, the F-18s, just insane amount of military hardware. The bombers going down here, so they need refueling support. And Israeli news is reporting that Iran is constructing drones on Venezuelan soil for Venezuela's use. They are doing this for economic and political benefits, strengthening Venezuela's dependence on Iran. So Iran is helping Venezuela to make drones. And a Venezuelan state-operated aircraft landed in Iran yesterday, and a big fire broke out at an oil refinery in Venezuela yesterday. And we now know that about 20% of the U.S. Navy's deployed fleet is now operating off of Venezuela. Wow. And a sanctioned Russian oil tanker made a U-turn on the way to Venezuela after a U.S. warship intersected its route near the country's coastline. Interesting. So Russian ships are going to Venezuela. And here we have some serious footage coming out of Germany. The German army is now preparing for heavy combat in Berlin, in the tunnels under Berlin, the subway tunnels. And here we have footage of the German Guard Battalion training to fight inside of Berlin's subway tunnels. Okay, now this is not something that normal infantry forces around the world train for. unless there's a serious threat to the capital of the country. Okay, so this tells me that Germany is preparing for a ground war with Russia. They're preparing for Russia to invade Germany and to try to capture Berlin, because if there were ever a war in Berlin and Germany was fighting for control of Berlin with Russia, they would have to make use of the subways to move around in the city. Okay, and here we have in this exercise they're practicing hauling off bodies or wounded troops. Okay, evacuating wounded troops. I mean, this isn't a counterterrorism exercise. Okay, they have belt-fed machine guns that they're using in this exercise. Look at that, guys. Okay, so this is very, very serious. The German army is preparing to defend Berlin from possibly a Russian invasion. And the U.S. Border Patrol is reportedly covertly monitoring millions of American drivers nationwide with a secretive AI-infused camera network to identify and detain people whose travel patterns are suspicious. So what they're doing is they're accessing a network of license plate readers and license plate cameras, like red light cameras and tolls and things that can read license plates, and they track your movements. And if the AI system determines that you're doing something they don't like, then they can randomly just come and arrest you. Okay, and we know that many vehicles today have GPSs on them, OnStar. Well, guess what, guys? Those OnStar modules and the GPS, they work both ways. That means that the government can track you in your vehicle. They can remotely disable your vehicle. They know where you are at all times. All right, so maybe I'll do a video on how to remove your OnStar module, or at least remove your satellite receiver so you can't be tracked. And according to Axios, Zelensky and U.S. representatives have reached an agreement on the timeline for signing Trump's new peace plan. Zelensky said his administration plans to work with the Trump administration on the proposed peace plan. Trump has been briefed on the plan to end the war in Ukraine, and he supports it. So this plan is a new plan that was secretly in the works over the last few weeks. Steve Witkoff and Rubio met with the Russians, and they basically made their own peace treaty with the Russians, a draft of it, and now they're sending it to Ukraine for Ukraine to take a look at it. And it's basically just maximalist demands from the Russians. Okay, there's no moderating at all of the Russian position, and I'm going to read to you some of the main points in this plan. Okay. And Zelensky said that Ukraine won't make any sharp statements on the U.S. plan yet, and confirms he will speak with Trump soon. And the U.S. is apparently expecting Zelensky to sign this latest peace agreement or surrender agreement by Thanksgiving. Okay, so Trump basically wants to end the war before the holidays so he has something to brag about, and to kind of take attention away from the Epstein files fiasco and some of the other things that have been going on. You know, his base is cracking right now. MAGA has completely cracked. Trump has attacked some of his closest allies, including Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Trump's poll numbers are very low. They're down to 38% approval rating, and it's looking like next year for the midterm elections, there's going to be a Democrat tsunami, a blue tsunami, guys. Okay, it's very, very serious. The Democrats are going to regain a lot of seats. And Ukraine is coming under intense pressure to accept a sweeping peace plan drawn up by the Trump administration with Moscow's input to end Russia's war in the country, according to Ukrainian officials. The Ukrainian officials said the Trump administration has told Zelensky and other people in his team that the White House was working to an aggressive timeline to finalize the proposal in order to bring the war to an end before the end of the year. They added that U.S. officials expect Zelensky to sign the agreement before Thanksgiving on Thursday next week, with the aim of presenting a peace deal to Moscow later this month and concluding the process by early December. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So this is absolutely insane. I want to read to you some of the main points of this plan. Okay, some really serious maximalist demands coming from Russia. So Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk would be recognized as de facto Russian, including by the United States. So the United States would have to recognize Crimea and eastern Ukraine as part of Russian territory. And Kherson and Zaporizhia would be frozen along the line of contact. Okay, but basically Russia would hold everything up until that line of contact, all right? So that would basically be like soft recognition that that's Russian. And then Russia would have to relinquish other territories it controls outside of those 5 regions, which they don't control anything, so there's no benefit to Ukraine there. Ukraine would be prohibited from making nuclear weapons, and they would have to cap their military at 600,000. They would not be able to do long-range strikes anymore, which means no strikes on Russia's oil. And they won't be able to produce or use long-range weaponry. NATO would not be allowed to expand any further to the east or basically at all. Basically, NATO cannot enlarge itself. They can't have new members anymore. And then Russia, in return, would not invade NATO. Russia would have to be invited to rejoin the G8, the Group of 8. And the U.S. and Russia would have to agree to extend treaties on nuclear weapon non-proliferation and control, including the START Treaty. The U.S. would have to lift sanctions on Russia, and all war crimes investigations against Russia would be ended. Guys, this is just the craziest peace proposal I've ever heard of. This is basically the U.S. bending over backwards, giving Russia everything. And I wonder if Putin has some information about Trump and Epstein, because all of a sudden, right now, Trump is pushing for this peace plan that basically would give Putin everything he wants and give Ukraine zero. Why would Trump suddenly change his tone on that when, a couple weeks ago he was mad at Putin, and now he's basically completely willing to capitulate to Putin and bend over for Putin? And I think that's because Putin has some dirt on Trump. I think it could be related to the Epstein situation. And maybe Trump feels like, well, if I give Putin what he wants, he's not going to tell the world that, I went to Epstein's Island or something. I don't know. And under the peace plan, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant would be under the supervision of the IAEA, and the electricity produced would be distributed equally between Russia and Ukraine. And then Ukraine would have to hold elections in 100 days. So that's the peace plan. Those are the main points. And Bloomberg is reporting that Britain is now preparing to deploy troops into Ukraine. Okay, so this is very serious. We're also hearing reports that Germany has confirmed preparations for the transfer of long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Okay, so now suddenly Germany is going to transfer Taurus missiles to Ukraine before this peace deal gets signed. And we're hearing that the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had canceled some meetings, and he's now going to be devoting his day today to having talks with European leaders and world leaders about this latest draft proposal. Okay. And the U.S. would like Germany to take over the command of NATO forces in Europe, according to the U.S. And the Republican Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas said that the real guarantees of security for Ukraine are from tanks, guns, and drones from the West, and not from empty promises of Western leaders. And Putin said that there is no longer any kind of political leadership in Ukraine. It is a criminal group. He also said the goals of the special military operation will be achieved. Wow. And Russian ports on the Baltic and Black Seas have significantly reduced oil shipments. And Ukrainian drones attacked a major oil refinery in Russia, the Ryazan oil refinery owned by Rosneft, okay, which has now ceased production of oil. Wow. So these oil attacks are really, really hurting Russia. Absolutely insane. And there was some kind of a fire underneath the U.S. Capitol yesterday, which prompted the fire department to be deployed, and 2 people were injured and required medical treatment at a hospital. So if you don't know, the U.S. Capitol building has tunnels underneath it so that senators, congressmen can go between different buildings. They have like their own subway system down there. It just seems a little bit strange to me. And we have multiple power plants, nuclear power plants in Ukraine that are operating without external power supplies following the massive attack on Ukraine 2 nights ago. So this is a report from the IAEA. They said the precarious nuclear safety and security situation during the conflict was underlined at Ukraine's 3 operating nuclear power plants, with 4 of their total of 9 reactors decreasing output following attacks that further destabilized the electrical grid. 2 of the plants, the Khmelnytsky and Rivne, had already lowered production of electricity as a result of military activities earlier this month. Yesterday, both facilities reduced production further after they each lost the connection to one of their high-voltage power lines. The IAEA teams based at these 2 sites also had to seek shelter during the morning's air raid alarms. The country's 3rd operating nuclear power plant, South Ukraine, also lost its connection to a high-voltage power line. The plant reported detecting 11 drones overnight, 1 kilometer from the site. So 3 major nuclear power plants in Ukraine have lost external power supplies, with up to 11 drones flying near one of them, just 1 kilometer from the power plant. That is very concerning, guys. And a group of unknown assailants attacked the Polish ambassador to Russia in St. Petersburg yesterday, and Poland is demanding that Belarus extradite the suspects in the railroad sabotage. And Israel signed a multi-billion-dollar deal with Rafael to ramp up production of the Iron Dome air defense system, boosting interceptor supplies. So it looks like Israel's preparing for potentially another war somewhere, probably with Iran. And Israel carried out a large number of airstrikes in Gaza and southern Lebanon yesterday, and Netanyahu and his defense minister visited an Israeli army outpost in Israeli-occupied southern Syria. And the former CIA spy, John Kirikou, said in a podcast that Israel warned Trump that if he didn't bomb Iran to take out the bunkers, that Israel was going to use nuclear weapons. Wow. And the U.S. is going to sell F-35s to Saudi Arabia, but they're going to be downgraded compared to Israel's aircraft due to a U.S. law that ensures Israel's qualitative military edge. Saudi jets will lack Israel's advanced weapons, electronic warfare systems, and next-generation AIM-260 missiles. And Netanyahu said yesterday that a Palestinian state will not be established. It's an existential threat to Israel and unrealistic even with reform. So Netanyahu is against a Palestinian state, but I think they're going to do it. They're going to force a Palestinian state. This peace deal that Trump negotiated with Hamas behind Israel's back is basically setting the framework, the groundwork for a Palestinian state, okay? And yesterday we had a lot of crazy political news here in the U.S. Trump advocated for the arrest, prosecution, and execution of several Democrat lawmakers who recently published a video urging U.S. military members to refuse illegal orders and uphold their oath to the Constitution. Trump called them traitors and accused them of seditious behavior at the highest level. So this is what Trump wrote here. He wrote, seditious behavior punishable by death. Wow, which is actually not true, okay? But this is just really escalating, okay? And let me just read to you what he wrote here. He wrote, it's called seditious behavior at the highest level. Each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. We won't have a country anymore. An example must be set. Wow. And Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, now has 30 days to release the files, which we know she has the power to redact anything that would be considered a threat to national security or jeopardize ongoing investigations. So they're going to heavily redact those files, guys. You're not going to see anything really too interesting. Trump's name is definitely not going to be in there, nor are any of Trump's immediate circle. They're not going to be in there. They're going to remove that, okay? And this is very concerning. It looks like Trump is an operative of the New World Order. Apparently, Trump is considering issuing an executive order that would seek to preempt state laws on artificial intelligence, threatening to sue or withhold federal funding from any state that attempts to pass laws restricting advancements in AI. Okay, so they want to push AI, guys, and Trump is helping that. AI is going to take control of everything to the point where we're not even going to be working anymore. We're going to get universal basic income. We're not going to be able to create wealth for ourselves. It's going to be like communism. You're going to get a check from the government, and the machines are going to do everything, okay? And Elon Musk said yesterday that AI and humanoid robots will actually eliminate poverty, and in 10 to 20 years, work will be optional. Money will stop being relevant, okay? So absolutely insane, and Trump is helping this effort of installing Skynet everywhere, okay? And the U.S. Coast Guard will no longer classify swastikas as hate symbols per a new draft policy, labeling them as potentially divisive instead. Pretty interesting. And Pakistan closed its airspace to Indian planes through December 23rd. So Indian registered planes, Indian owned planes, and planes operated by Indian pilots will not be able to fly over Pakistan. Okay, and the U.S. approved a $93 million sale to India of Javelin anti-tank missiles and Excalibur guided artillery shells. Interesting. And then finally, we have another unmarked NATO reconnaissance plane flying in the Black Sea. This was overnight last night. They've been flying this thing every single night for the past few nights. Lots of reconnaissance here in the Black Sea. And then for some odd reason, a NATO reconnaissance plane was patrolling eastern Poland, even though there was no Ukraine air raid. But that's the latest breaking news that I have. I might be back later on tonight with more breaking news. And until the next time, check out my Twitter. Follow me on Patreon. $5 a month gets you access to all these updates and more without any advertisements. So until the next time, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.